Well, we're back once again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Kyle Style Podcast. And we're going back to Ferguson, Missouri today. There's something smoldering, something brewing down in Ferguson once again. Only this time, it's not racial tensions, although some allege a racial component. At what is known as the West Lake Landfill, which is a few miles, less than 10 miles away from Ferguson, which is about 10 miles outside of St. Louis proper, lies the West Lake Landfill, and it has had what the evacuation orders I'm looking at here say was a subsurface smoldering event, which has been occurring for several years, right? Now, this happens sometimes. You can have layers upon layers of combustible things, low oxygen, maybe there's moisture, and these fires can just sort of smolder and go on and on. So it's been years now. Now, this fire has allegedly, according to some sources, spread to about within 1,000 feet of the real problem. The real problem is radioactive waste. There's radioactive waste that was dumped there from way back during the Manhattan Project, right? I'm going to point it out again. Go back and listen to Cultural Fallout Episode 2. Get an idea of how invested we were in nuclear proliferation and nuclear arms race. And think about the fact that from the very start, we were mishandling our nuclear waste, right? Now, this nuclear waste has been in the West Lake Landfill since, the mid to late 40s. Other military waste was dumped in there as well, but then it became a municipal dump and has just been a public dump. And it's managed by Republic Services, who have been accused of mishandling this fire, knowing that there are radioactive waste. There's radioactive waste stored there. Now, this evacuation shelter-in-place plan that I'm looking at, which I'll put a link to the PDF, is, it's sort of standard in a sense. I mean, public officials are saying, okay, it's not really that urgent, and yet here's this order that describes how, who should be evacuated and how, and that there will be almost no warning. It says that this event will most likely occur with little or no warning. Now, what we're talking about is not just, there's radioactive waste and it's on fire. You're talking about plumes of radioactive dust and ash going up into the sky and raining down over Ferguson, over large swaths potentially of St. Louis itself, and maybe further afield, depending on winds and whatnot. Now, I've also seen some images that show that this landfill is also in the path of tornadoes. Okay? It's also on an active fault line. It's also part of flood zones. So never mind the fire. The fires are one of the more pressing things, but it also moves slowly. Well, I mean, what about a tornado or an earthquake or something that can really crack this thing open, spread this stuff around? And the response has been somewhat strong from the public. Apparently, this one article I was reading, I'll check the links down here, it's close to like 300 local citizens showed up to the city council meeting there to talk about this, and apparently they were a little heated, and there's rumor and suspicion of misconduct, and people are scared. And when you're talking about an evacuation plan, it seems dire, it seems very serious. And this whole situation is still evolving, and the thing is that there is time to still at least keep the fire aspect out of it. I mean, I don't know how how do you put out a landfill fire. I guess you'd have to like dig it up, but that's kind of part of the problem in the first place. Is we don't want to dig up and make airborne these radioactive particles. So that's going to be a big project. But we have time because this fire spreads slowly. We have time to try to do something about it now. The other issues, though, tornadoes and earthquakes and stuff, those can happen at almost any time. We don't know when they're going to happen. Floods, we just don't know. So long term, we got to take care of the radioactive waste aspect. But this whole idea is that this stuff has been sitting there, inert, since the mid-40s, right? Radioactive waste from the creation of the first atomic bombs in the Manhattan Project. Now, this sort of lying in wait kind of idea and this sort of hidden threat reminded me of an older story. And you know how I like to do it on the Kyle Style podcast. I'm going to talk about something current, and then I'll draw a connection to something else. Now, this other story is, again, an older story, and it has much more sinister implications than its name might entail. And it's the story of a neighborhood in western New York State known as the Love Canal. So the story of the Love Canal, really begins with its construction. What is the Love Canal? Well, the Love Canal was made by an entrepreneur named William T. Love in the early 1890s. And his plan was to dig a canal from the Niagara River to Lake Ontario. And he believed that they could turn it into, a source of hydroelectric power, right? Well, they ended up not finishing it, and it sat unfinished. It was used as a swimming hole. It was used in the winters as an ice skating rink, and it was only about 1 mile long, about 50 feet wide, and 10 to 40 feet deep. Now, when the project was abandoned, it filled with water, was used as a swimming hole and a skating rink, but by the 1940s, it was purchased by the Hooker Electrochemical Company, and they began to dump their company's chemical waste into it. And, not just pour it in, but they drained the canal, and they lined the bottom and the sides with a thick layer of clay. And they started putting 55-gallon drums of various chemical wastes into the canal. They also bought an area immediately around the canal, 70 feet away from the canal on each side. And the U.S. Army also dumped waste there. The U.S. Army also dumped waste in the West Lake Landfill. So, after World War II, the dump site continued being used until 1953. Okay, from the beginning of the usage to the end of the usage as a dump, 21,000 tons of chemicals were dumped. Chemicals such as caustics, alkalines, fatty acids, and chlorinated hydrocarbons from the manufacturing of dyes, perfumes, solvents for rubber, and synthetic resins. Right? Now, they're buried, 20 to 25 feet deep. And after they stopped dumping there, they covered over with another layer of clay, put earth over the top, called it good. Now, April 28th, 1953, the Niagara Falls School District purchased the land for $1 from the Hooker Chemical Company, who included a disclaimer that there were hazardous materials there and that they were not liable for anybody building or using that land. And they stated that the area should be sealed off so as to prevent the possibility of persons or animals coming in contact with those materials. Right? Well, Niagara Falls City School District proceeded to build 2 schools. They built the 99th Street School and the 93rd Street School 6 blocks away. This was 1955, right? When the 93rd or the 99th Street School opened, 400 children attended the school. In that same year, a 25-foot area collapsed of the ground, right? Collapsed and exposed the metal drums. This then had rain runoff, which filled it with puddles, with water. And the children apparently would play and splash in the rainwater that had these chemicals leaking into it. Right? 1957, the city of Niagara Falls constructed sewers that were going to run to low-income housing that was going to be adjacent to the Love Canal area. And during this process, they ruptured the sides of the clay seal on the Love Canal itself. Now, there was also the LaSalle Expressway was built right next to this. So that caused runoff, which then caused more water to wash through the Love Canal containment chamber, if you want to call it a chamber. So flooding caused it to overflow and whatnot. Okay. So residents in the area began reporting that puddles of chemicals and fluids would come up in their basements and in their yards. So fast forward to 1979. You now have entire neighborhoods built on ground that is seeping with hazardous toxic waste from this breached Love Canal containment. Now, by 1979, there was a noted disturbingly high rate of miscarriages, right? Carcinogens had been identified in the local groundwater and even in the air and the earth in people's basements and around their homes, including benzene and dioxin. And dioxin has been called one of the most toxic chemicals ever extracted, right? So in 1979, the EPA announced the result of blood tests that showed that a lot of residents there, a statistically high number, had high white blood cell counts, which is similar, which is an early onset form of leukemia. Now, residents there were also showing chromosomal damage. Okay, as many as 33% of the residents had experienced chromosomal damage. Now, as with radiation damage, chromosomal damage it's one of those things that to me, it is one of the most horrendous things that can really happen to you. Because typically, as in this case, aside from seeing some chemicals, maybe some odd-looking liquids come up out of the ground in the basement or something like that, you don't necessarily know that it's happening to you until, as these people experienced, you go to have children. And the level of birth defects was extremely high in the Love Canal neighborhood. Disturbingly high rate of miscarriages. A lot of people working in the area and living in the area, the adults, had higher rates of cancers and nervous disorders. Now, there was also discovery of some of these toxic chemicals in the milk of nursing mothers, right? And the one case, like half of the children, 2 out of 4 children from a Love Canal family had birth defects. And this is straight from the Wikipedia article. I've seen other accounts of some of the other deformities, but one girl was born deaf with a cleft palate, an extra row of teeth, and slight retardation, and a boy was born with an eye defect, just in that one family. Now, again, what you're talking about with chromosomal damage is the potential. It's not really reversible. What you get is that through all of human history, men and women paired off or reproduced, and that genetic lineage was handed down and down and down until it comes down to you. And your DNA bears that mark, and bears, in a sense, their experience, as in they lived, they didn't die. And you get exposed to chemicals like this, which can destroy and disrupt your DNA. And it kind of, in a very literal sense, turns you into a mutant, but not in an extreme way necessarily. I think these deformed children are an example of that. The idea of a mutation, and then these children come out looking like monsters when they should have been healthy, and their parents should have been healthy, but they were exposed without their knowing to incredibly unnatural. I hate to say unnatural because they are just molecules, and they are extracted and derived from other natural substances, but concentrated and reformulated. And the long-term damage, of course, is that you no longer are necessarily able to make viable children, and presumably your children that are deformed and possibly mentally retarded are not going to continue on and have children themselves. And so possibly your entire, genetic line is brought to a screeching halt because of negligence. And not only that, but this entire neighborhood now is, well, we'll get to that. So Hooker Chemical Company was eventually bought out by Occidental Petroleum. Now, this will become important later. But when the residents in the area were having trouble getting this taken care of, right? In some cases, they were sort of told to sell their homes and just move away. But no one would buy these homes because they knew it's like buying a haunted house. They knew that, no one was going to buy these homes that they knew were toxic with all these awful chemicals. But in the late 1970s, an EPA official, Eckhart C. Beck, visited the Love Canal. And he described, quote, "I visited the canal area at that time. Corroding waste disposal drums could be seen breaking up through the grounds of backyards. Trees and gardens were turning black and dying. One entire swimming pool had been popped up from its foundation, afloat now on a small sea of chemicals. Puddles of noxious substances were pointed out to me by the residents. Some of these puddles were in their yards, some were in their basements, others yet were on the school grounds. Everywhere the air had a faint, choking smell. Children returned from play with burns on their hands and faces." Now, this did begin to turn into a public affairs issue and a political issue. August 7th, 1978, President Jimmy Carter himself, for the first time ever, announced federal emergency funds for something that was not a natural disaster. Okay? But apparently this wasn't enough. They originally were going to relocate several hundred families from the neighborhood, but not all of them. So, and I'll include the link to the actual newspaper article. But May 20th, 1980, Lois Gibbs was the president of the Love Canal Homeowners Association, who became a citizen activist as a result of all of the inaction of the local and federal politicians, and uh, her and other homeowners, as part of the homeowners association, took two EPA officials hostage and demanded the evacuation of more than 700 other families from the neighborhood, and that they wouldn't, they wouldn't let these EPA guys go until they did that. Now, you're basically saying if we have to live here, these two guys got to live here, and if it's safe, then you got nothing to worry about, right? But you know that they knew, that it wasn't safe, and that they were probably itching to get out of there. But the police even said that they couldn't get in to rescue them because there were so many of the other homeowners there blocking the way. What I would say is more likely is that the police probably just understood what they were doing and didn't try that hard to save those guys. That's what I would say. But eventually, more ethical heads prevailed, and more than 800 families were reimbursed for their homes, and this became known as, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, or what we more, colloquially call the Superfund Act. And Superfund has been used to clean up a lot of other industrial sites. Near where I grew up in North Idaho, the Silver Valley had a large Superfund project to clean up a lot of the mine runoff that had contaminated a lot of the soil and everything with lead and mercury and other stuff. And so rather than abandon infrastructure, you just dig up the earth, you move that toxic, dangerous earth away, and you bring in good earth and replace it. I don't know what they do with the, dangerous earth, but they do something with it. And so as a result of that sort of nightmarish effect of these chemicals on human beings who are exposed to them, the negligent handling of the chemicals and the procurement of the land by the city, right? Eventually, Occidental Petroleum was sued by the EPA, and in 1995, they paid $129 million in restitution. And residents also had their own lawsuits, various lawsuits, following this whole scandal. It's kind of weird if you're thinking about it over the course of decades, it kind of becomes a scandal. The threat is there the whole time, but until it becomes a public issue, it isn't necessarily a scandal yet. But what we know now is, again, that negligent handling of dangerous substances led to, at least for that neighborhood, a whole generation of people who are unhealthy, who in some senses will never be healthy, right? And a mother had to take some government officials hostage in a home to try to draw attention to this, the plight of these people, because it was foisted upon them against their knowledge, right? So now we come back up to the present now. Now, I'm going to say, as a lot of times I say with some of these news stories, is keep an eye on it. I don't know if I'm going to try to do updates on this podcast about specific stories or anything, but I'm getting mixed news and mixed messages. Like, again, I mentioned that racial component. There are websites that are, I would call it, black-leaning, and they have a kind of conspiratorial attitude about it, that this was all intended and it's supposed to be happening, and they don't care about black people. I'm going more with the inept approach, which is just the people who dumped that waste there back in the day, they didn't know how much bigger this city was going to grow. They didn't know that it was going to become a municipal dump. They didn't necessarily plan or understand even maybe what the real long-term effects of, nuclear waste were going to be. And so they just handled it in a negligent way. And now it's Republic Services' problem. And they're probably going to try to dodge the bullet as much as they can to avoid having to clean up nuclear waste. Because I don't even know if a private corporation has ever cleaned up a nuclear accident or nuclear waste, I don't know if they're even prepared to do anything with that, and I don't know what you do with it, right? Because we did build Yucca Mountain, which that would turn into a giant waste of money because we decided to not use it after we had built it. Probably should have done that in reverse order. But, yeah, I don't know what you would do to get to the nuclear waste that's in there, radioactive waste, how you handle it, what you then do with it, and even if they do clean it up, they say they cleaned it up, is that going to convince the sort of jaded, Black Americans that live in the area who already think that it's a sort of an intentional thing? Would you believe them? I mean, I don't know if I would, and I don't even live there. And I'll try to include the links to some of these articles because the one that I found has these amazing maps that show where the landfill is. It's right next to a airport as well. It shows where tornado paths have gone. It shows where flood paths have gone, and it shows where like the fire currently is. And if anything, this fire part is really just kind of a Kickstarter to help, light the fuse in a sense, to get a little more attention on this thing, because what we're talking about, if it becomes a giant radioactive plume of smoke, is a kind of mass evacuation health crisis that I don't think has been seen since, Chernobyl, or maybe like Katrina. Like you're talking, you would probably, everybody in the St. Louis area would probably be trying to flee. And until it's assessed, everyone would just panic and try to flee. And even if it gets an all clear, even if you could clean it up or something, I wonder how willing people would be to move back into a city that they know had radioactive fallout rain down over it. And how far could it spread? If it was, prevailing winds going west to east, it blows it further east, who knows? And so I don't know. I think I'm out of actual info for you. I think I might be out of opinion for you. Google this, check the news. This might be coming up more. I haven't necessarily heard anything about it. Today I haven't. The last couple days I haven't seen anything new about it. And just keep an eye out for it. And I want to keep this in mind too, is that this is one such site where this kind of thing is happening. I'm wondering about places like Hanford, other chemical and biological nuclear weapons storage facilities or disposal sites. I have a feeling there's going to be more stuff like this over time. Again, due to that, that fallout culture, that nuclear culture, we've created all of this waste and all of these weapons, and all of this stuff has to go somewhere. So I guess until next time, don't be scared. Bye. Oh, and one more thing. Check the links below. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. Slide right over to the GoFundMe page and throw a handful of coins at me. Digitally, at least. Digitally anyway. And keep supporting me and give me feedback. Give me comments. Tell me I'm an idiot. Tell me I'm great. And tell a friend. All right. Until next time.